Hi, my name is Cheryl, and by now hopefully you'll have had a chance to read the privacy policy and procedure. If you haven't, just pause and have a quick read through it, and then we'll continue. Okay, so the privacy policy and procedure, as with the other policies and procedures VFA Learning have, are written with the purpose, the policy and the procedure. In this case, the purpose for the privacy policy is relating to how we maintain the privacy and confidentiality of our personnel and our participants. The policy talks about the compliance to the Privacy Act of 1998, including the 13 Australian privacy policies. We're going to go through each one of those later on, just quickly, so that I'll highlight the areas that are most important. So the policy talks about the fact that VFA Learning have a framework for our privacy practices. We review them annually and we make sure that we mitigate against as many risks as we can. So Privacy Policy Principle 1 is open and transparent management of personal information. Importantly, in Principle 1, it talks about the fact that we can only collect, hold and use and disclose information that we gather from our clients and stakeholders for the purposes that it was intended for. So in this case, it's providing services to the clients, managing employee and contracted teams, promoting products and services, conducting internal business functions and activities and requirements of stakeholders. As a government registered training organisation, we're required by ASQA and also the funding bodies, state governments, to disclose information. But we'll only do that under the requirements of the Standards for Registered Training Organisations and the Data Provision Requirements of 2012. And I'll read this to you. It's the National Vocational Education and Training Regulators Act 2011. We would be required to give information to governments, the Australian Apprenticeship Support Networks, employers, job active providers, schools, parents and guardians, and service providers such as credit agencies and background check providers. So the kinds of personal information we hold are contact details, employment details, educational background, demographic information, course progress and achievement, and financial billing information. The types of sensitive information that we would hold would be identity details, employee details and HR information, complaint or issue information, so when someone has a complaint or an issue that they bring up, disability status, Indigenous status and background checks. So how is the personal information collected? So for us, it's mostly done through forms that we ask them to fill out, the application form, enrolment form, and any time they may go onto our website and leave information for us to contact them back. So how personal information is held? Well, as soon as practical, we transfer it to electronic means. Any paper-based we store in a secure manner, and we monitor appropriate use at all times. So only people who are within their job role will have access to logins for systems or access to files. So we do retain the information, and as you would know by some of our other policies and procedures, especially quality training that we've gone through just before, we are required to keep the documents sometimes for up to 30 years. Or if not the document, we're required to keep the electronic record. So if someone is wanting to access their personal information, they have a right to do so, and they can do that through the VFA Learning Privacy Officer. The phone number and the email are there, so they only have to do that. So we are, but we're going to check to make sure they are who they say they are. So we're going to robustly check them to make sure that they are the person that is requiring the information. If it's to a third party, we have to make sure that the person to whom the information relates to has been contacted and given approval, and will only authorised parties and for valid reasons will they be given access to the information. So correspondence between VFA Learning and students or their parents and guardian is kept in a secure manner and is confidential. Any complaints are held in a confidential manner as well, and any complaints about the breach of the Privacy Act we maintain as confidential as well. Here it says likely overseas disclosures. It's very unlikely that we'd have to do that, but we would only disclose to people who are approved to have that information. So we do have to make our privacy policy available to students that ask for it. So we would do that, and we would either email it out to them. It is available on our website, and it's also mentioned in their student handbook. We review and update policy and procedure annually at least, and if not, when any other information is provided us or an act is updated. Privacy Principle 2 is anonymity and pseudonymity. Students have the right to assume an anonymous name if they want to, but it's only where practical, and they must understand that for under Australian law, if we're going to issue a nationally accredited qualification, we do need that person's real name to be honoured. So Privacy Principle 3, collection of solicited information. So we can only collect information for the necessary business practices that we're going to provide the services for. And we need to make sure that it's stored and we collect it by lawful and fair means. Principle 4, dealing with unsolicited information. When students talk to us and they give us information, we need to be able to ascertain whether we need to keep that information in order to be able to provide the service. Where it's not a requirement of the services that we're going to provide, we need to destroy it or re-identify it and make sure that no one else sees it. So Privacy Principle 5 talks about the notification and collection of personal information. So we take reasonable steps to notify the individual of the information collection, or otherwise ensure that the individual is aware of why we're collecting it. So the information, I won't go through it in detail, but please make sure you've read through it. Things like VFA Learning's identity and contact details are given them, facts and circumstances of the collection. The collection is required or authorised by law, and we need to tell them what that is. The purpose of the collection, why we're doing it, the consequences of invalid personal information, whether we are likely to disclose that information, and advice on the policy, privacy policy to them. Collection from third parties. VFA Learning collects personal information from other organisations. So if we do that, we confirm whether the organisation has provided relevant notice to the above individual that we're going to do it, and whether the individual was otherwise aware of the details at the time of collection. And if this has not occurred, we will undertake this notice to ensure the individual is fully informed. Privacy Principle 6. Use or disclosure of personal information. So we will only use or disclose information if the individual has consented, if an individual would reasonably expect the secondary use or disclosure, or using or disclosing information is required and authorised by law. If we're required to make a written note or use of disclosure for the secondary person, we need to have the date and the use of disclosure, the details of the personal information, the enforcement body conducting the enforcement related activity, and if the organisations use the information, how they're going to, and the basis we reasonably believe that it can be done. So I'll just push this down to the next page. So privacy principle 7 is direct marketing. So we only use the personal information if the student or the person giving us that information would expect us to do so. So we use it for direct marketing, but if the student decides that they don't want us, or the person decides that they don't want us to contact them anymore, we give them an opt-out clause. Privacy principle 8, cross-border disclosure. As I said, again, that's overseas recipients, and that's mostly unlikely for us to happen. Principle 9, adoption or disclosure of government-related identifiers. As you know, all of our students have a unique identifier, so we would only use or disclose government-related to an individual, so we would not do that unless the situation is required by law, where reasonably necessary to verify the identity of the individual, where reasonable necessary to fulfil obligations to a state or territory body, such as a funding organisation, and as prescribed by the regulations. Privacy principle 10, quality of personal information. Okay, so we need to make sure that this is accurate, up-to-date, complete and relevant. And we initially collect this information from the person and when we disclose their personal information. So we ask the students to update their personal information all the time, especially their email address, because that's our major way in which we communicate with them. Privacy principle 11 is security of personal information. This talks about the measures that we take to make sure that all the information that we hold is kept in a secure manner and it is not misused, interfered with or lost. So we destroy or identify personal information and make sure that only staff that have authorization to use and access do. Privacy principle 12, access to personal information. This, as I said, is where we ensure that only the authorised person has access. We ensure confirmation of the identity of the person requesting the information. It says here that we were within 14 calendar days notified of a refusal to give access, and within 30 days by giving access to the personal information that is requested in a manner in which it is requested. Privacy principle 13, individual requests, correcting a VFA learnings initiative. Then we go on to talk about the procedure and the collection, and as I said, we've talked about how we collect information and how we store it, so I won't go into these in much detail, but please make sure that you do read them and aware. Vet Student Loans has no additional information required, but Skills First do. So as we're scrolling through this, you'll see that there are a few points that we need to make aware. So please, if you would make sure that you have a look at those, read them. Any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.